The plate hit the
Oh
floor,
no, I
steam
am
and
so
gravy splattered
sorry.
across the diner tiles. Gasps echoed through the room, silverware paused midair. "We don't serve beggars," the owner barked, his voice slicing through the clatter. In the corner, a frail old man in a torn military coat froze, eyes dropping to the ground like he'd been here before. Clara didn't think. She stepped forward, planting herself between him and the rage at the counter. Her apron flapped against her knees, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. Outside, rain hammered the windows, turning the glass into rippling sheets of gray. She didn't know it yet, but before the next sunrise, the air above this diner would roar with the blades of a military helicopter. And when it landed, 200 soldiers, dressed in full uniform, would stand in silent formation. Not for the owner, not for the town, but for her. Clara James wasn't the kind of woman people noticed. Not because she hid from the world. She simply moved through it quietly, like a shadow cast by the morning sun. At 32, she'd grown used to living in the spaces between other people's conversations, filling coffee cups, wiping counters, and offering polite smiles that rarely came back. In Ridgefield, Kentucky, where the paint on storefronts peeled in slow motion and the factory whistle hadn't sounded in years, being invisible wasn't a choice. It was a survival skill. Clara wore her brown apron like armor and tied her hair back just tight enough to keep the weight of the day off her shoulders. Her life was small, simple, and lonely. A rented room above an auto garage, a one-eyed tabby named Smokey, and under her bed, a shoebox filled with war medals, relics from her grandfather, Henry James, a Korean War veteran who raised her after her parents vanished into their own storms. Henry used to tell her, "Honor isn't loud, Clara. It's quiet, like sweeping the porch before guests come, even if they never show." 3 years after he passed, Clara still carried those words like a shield. They guided her when the world pushed back, when customers complained, when paychecks came up light, when she swallowed the sting of unfairness rather than make a scene. Before we go further, if stories like this mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. You might inspire someone else to act. That rainy Tuesday evening, the diner smelled of frying onions and burnt coffee. A handful of regulars sat scattered across the booths, all pretending not to notice the storm outside. The door creaked open, and in shuffled a man, thin, shivering, his coat a patchwork of holes and rain stains. It wasn't just any coat. The faded U.S. Army insignia on the sleeve caught Clara's eye instantly. His left leg dragged slightly, wrapped in old gauze that looked weeks overdue for changing. He clutched a paper bag to his chest like it might shatter in his hands. He didn't ask for a seat, just stood beside an empty booth, his head lowered, waiting for permission to exist. "Evening," Clara said softly, towel still in her hand. "Can I get you something warm?" He hesitated, then spoke in a voice worn thin by years. "Hot water, ma'am, and maybe a crust of bread. If you've got one, heading for the trash." The words hit her like a memory. Her grandfather telling her about the night a stranger fed him on a cold Korean street in 1952. Without a word, she slipped into the kitchen. A returned plate of chicken and dumplings sat under the heat lamp, untouched. She added extra bread, poured fresh coffee, and carried it back like she'd been serving kings her whole life. "It's already paid for," she told him, setting the tray down. "And the coffee's on me." He stared at the food as if unsure it was real. Slowly, his fingers curled around the mug. "You remind me of my wife," he murmured. "Said everyone deserved warmth, especially those who've lived through too much cold." Clara blinked fast, willing herself not to cry. She didn't notice the owner step out from the kitchen, his jaw tightening as he spotted the scene. And that's when the storm inside the diner began, one far louder than the rain outside. Because the next words out of his mouth would change Clara's life forever. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Wayne Becker's voice cut through the clatter of forks and the hiss of the fryer. He stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his thick frame blocking the light, his eyes locked on the steaming plate in front of the stranger. Clara straightened, her hands still damp from the towel she'd been holding. "He's a veteran, sir. He asked for hot water and bread. That meal was going to be thrown out." "I don't care," Wayne snapped, his voice rising with each word. "This ain't a charity. If people see us feeding street trash for free, they'll think we're a soup kitchen." The few customers still in the diner froze. A couple in the corner stirred their coffee with deliberate slowness, pretending not to hear. A man at the counter folded his newspaper a little too neatly. No one met Clara's eyes. "I paid for the coffee," she said quietly. "You can take it out of my tips." Wayne slammed his palm down on the counter. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "You don't get to decide how I run this place. You made me look soft in front of customers." And then came the dagger. "You're fired, right now. Pack your things and get out." The words didn't surprise her. Not really. Disappoint her? Absolutely. Hurt? More than she cared to admit. But surprise? No. What stung wasn't the shouting. It was the silence from everyone else. Not a single person stood up for her. Not a thank you, not even a nod. Just lowered eyes and the scraping of cutlery against plates. Clara untied her apron slowly, folding it over once, then again. Her hands trembled, but her back stayed straight, just like her grandfather had taught her. She walked out into the pouring rain, canvas shoes soaking through in seconds, her hair plastered to her forehead. Under the awning, she paused, breathing in the cold. She wouldn't cry. Not here. A rustle from the alley drew her eyes. The veteran, still clutching his paper bag, limped toward her. His breath was shallow, but his gaze carried a steady, quiet fire. "I saw what happened," he said, voice rough. "I shouldn't have let you pay a price for me." "You didn't do anything wrong," she told him. He reached into his coat and pulled out something warm from the inside pocket, a tarnished dog tag. Pressing it into her palm, he said, "You just saved a shattered soul, child. You reminded me I'm not invisible." Before she could answer, he turned and melted back into the rain, swallowed by the shadows between streetlights. That night, in her tiny room above the auto garage, Clara hung her wet clothes over the back of a chair. Smokey curled against her hip as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dog tag in her hand. She didn't know his story, but she knew the weight of it. The etched letters read, "Turner, Eli J." Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand, a news alert. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again, this time a text from a former coworker. "You're trending." Confused, Clara opened her messages. A shaky, grainy video filled her screen. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation at the diner. By morning, it had already reached more eyes than she could imagine. And among those eyes were a set that hadn't seen her in years, but would change everything when they did. By the time the sun crept over Ridgefield, Clara's phone was a storm she couldn't turn off. The video from the diner had gone everywhere. Facebook shares, local news segments, even a veterans forum that her grandfather used to read. The comments were a mess. Some people praised her. Others accused her of breaking rules, of being reckless. A few suggested she'd been stealing from the diner for years. She ignored most of it. Rent was still due in 10 days. Smokey still needed food. And the dog tag on her nightstand still caught the light every time she glanced toward it. She didn't know that across town, another phone had lit up with the same video, held in the calloused hands of a man who wore his uniform like it was part of his skin, Colonel Matthew Turner. He hadn't seen his father, Eli, in years, thought maybe he never would. But the moment he recognized the bent posture, the limp, and the stubborn tilt of his father's chin in that video, he knew. And he knew the woman who'd stood between Eli and the rain-soaked silence of a forgotten life deserved more than a thank you. At 6:45 a.m., the quiet of Ridgefield's main street broke, not with noise, but with presence. Black SUVs began rolling into town, one after another, their tires whispering against the wet pavement. Doors opened, boots hit the ground in unison, and the air shifted. They came in rows: Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force. Men and women in full-dress uniforms forming a wall of discipline and respect outside Billy's diner. Inside, Wayne Becker was refilling napkin holders when the bell over the door jingled. He looked up and froze. The man in the doorway wore a sharply pressed Army uniform, his chest lined with medals. His expression was calm but carried the weight of someone who'd spent a lifetime giving orders that could change the course of lives. "I'd like to speak to the owner," he said. Wayne's voice cracked. I'm the owner." Colonel Turner stepped forward, removed his cap, and spoke in a tone that cut through the entire diner. "The man you humiliated here yesterday, he's the reason I'm alive." Every head turned. The air thickened. In 2007, during my third deployment to Iraq, our convoy was ambushed. My transport was hit. 12 of us were trapped. Your beggar carried me 3 miles under enemy fire, with shrapnel in his leg, before he accepted treatment for himself. Gas rippled through the diner. No one moved. Turner pulled a small laminated citation from his coat. This is his silver star. He pawned it once to buy food for a homeless family, and yesterday, a waitress, someone you fired, reminded me of the country my father believed in. Wayne Becker tried to speak. No sound came out. From behind Turner, a young corporal stepped forward holding a small black case. Turner's voice softened. "Bring her here." A local reporter sprinted up the narrow stairs above the auto garage, breathless. "They're asking for you, the soldiers. Colonel Turner, the whole block is shut down. You need to come now." Clara thought it was a mistake until she stepped into the street and saw the uniforms, the salutes, the way the soldiers parted to let her pass. And then, all at once, 200 hands rose in perfect unison. But it wasn't the salute that brought Clara to her knees. It was what Colonel Turner placed in her hand next. Clara stood in the middle of Main Street, rainwater still glistening on the asphalt, the weight of 200 salutes pressing into her chest. Colonel Turner stepped forward, opening the small black case. Inside lay a silver star, its surface worn but unbowed, much like the man who had once earned it. "My father wanted you to have this," Turner said. Clara's throat tightened. I can't. It's not mine." "It is now," Turner replied, his voice steady. "You gave him back something this country forgot, his dignity." The metal was cool in her palm, but the warmth in her chest was overwhelming. She thought of her grandfather, of all the lessons he'd whispered to her in the quiet moments. She thought of Eli Turner, disappearing into the rain with nothing but a paper bag and pride. And she thought of how a simple choice to ignore the rules for the sake of humanity had brought her here. The moment didn't end with applause. It ended with a silence that was richer than any cheer. The kind of silence that says, "We see you." Within a week, Billy's Diner was shuttered. Suppliers refused to deliver. Half the staff quit. Veterans groups lined the sidewalks with signs that read, "Honor lives here." Wayne Becker was gone before anyone could ask where. Clara didn't seek the spotlight. She turned down interviews, declined offers to tell her side on talk shows. Instead, she accepted a job offer from a veterans nonprofit, a position managing a brand new community kitchen in an old warehouse on the other side of town. It wasn't fancy. The walls were scuffed, the tables mismatched, but the place had heart. Volunteers came in every morning, former soldiers, single parents, retirees, high school kids, rolling up their sleeves to make sure no one left hungry. Smokey, the one-eyed tabby, had his own spot on the windowsill, keeping watch over everyone like a grizzled general. Clara never hung the silver star on the wall. She kept it in a small wooden box in her office, alongside a folded flag and Eli Turner's tarnished dog tag. It wasn't there for display. It was there as a reminder of the cost of compassion and its worth. One afternoon, just before closing, the kitchen door creaked open. A boy, no more than 8, stepped inside. His sneakers were too big, his hair windblown. He clutched a dollar bill in one hand and a cookie wrapped in wax paper in the other. "I saw you in the video," he said. "My grandpa was a soldier too. He used to help people. So, I wanted to help someone too." Clara knelt down, eyes stinging, and placed a hand over her heart. The same gesture 200 soldiers had given her that morning in the street. "Yes," she whispered, "this will help someone." The boy's smile was small but certain, and when he left, the air felt warmer. Some stories fade from headlines. Some videos get buried under newer outrages. But in Ridgefield, people still remember the morning the soldiers came, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet. Because it proved that dignity can survive in the smallest of acts, and that sometimes the most powerful stand you take is for someone sitting alone in the rain. If you've ever believed that kindness can change the course of a life, share Clara's story. And if you want to keep hearing stories of quiet heroes and everyday courage, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because somewhere out there, the next story is already unfolding, and you deserve to see it.